So today I've come to the RocketGro garden to help plant some tomatoes, and these tomatoes behind me have been grown in the polytunnel and they've just been planted out. And in fact I've got one here that is going to be popped into this bed. But what I want to talk about is feeding. Now, a lot of people don't realise that they need to feed their plants. People know they need to water them, but they don't realise that just like us, they need nutrients to help them grow. Some people though do know about feeding tomatoes, and there's lots and lots of specially developed tomato feed that you can buy. And tomato feed is special because it's high in a nutrient called potassium, and potassium is really good for producing excellent fruits. And when you are growing tomatoes, what you want is lots of lovely fruits. But potassium is also really good for disease resistance. It helps plants combat disease. It helps plants fight against extreme weather, so drought, frost. So it's not just about the fruits. I would always suggest that you actually start feeding with an all-purpose plant food, which has NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. Nitrogen is excellent for the green leafy growth. Phosphorus you need for growing the roots, so the roots of the shoots and roots, and then finally potassium for the fruits. Get them established really well by using some all-purpose plant food, and then once they start to flower and start to fruit, then you can add the special tomato feed. But word of caution, don't just give it tomato feed. In between your feeding, I would then, even when they're fruiting, make sure they've got a bit of all-purpose, because that will help. So maybe once a week, do your tomato feed, and then every other week add in some all-purpose, and that way you'll ensure that you have a completely healthy plant and not just one that's got good fruits. So when it comes to feeding your tomato plants, you don't need to wait until you plant them out. So these ones are going to be going outside, not in the polytunnel, and the weather just hasn't been ready to plant them outside. I've been hardening them off, which basically means you take them outside during the day and then you bring them back at night time, and you do that for about 7 to 10 days, again keeping an eye on the weather, because tomatoes do not want to go out when there is still a risk of frost. And also, when you're hardening them off, don't place them in direct sun because that will scorch the leaves. Now, the reason I say about feeding is, let me show you these little seedlings here. So if you have a look at this tomato, I mean, it's got a fantastic root system, so it can be potted up into a next size of pot, but you can start feeding it, because if you look, it's a bit yellow, it's a bit purpley, which means it is deficient in nitrogen, magnesium, lots of other nutrients. So give it a very weak, diluted, all-purpose plant food, and that will really help kickstart it growing and make it healthier so it can withstand being outside when it's time to plant it. When it comes to feeding your plants, always read the instructions, because you do not want to add a bit more than they say, because you will risk scorching your plant roots, and especially when you're feeding young plants, their roots are very delicate. So always give it a good shake before you do it, and then measure it out. Sometimes they'll say 1 capful, 20 ml. I'm going to be safe and measure in a jug, and I've got a 10-litre watering can, and I'm just going to do half strength as to what the label says. I like to fill up my watering can first, then I put in my feed, and then I give it a good mix, and then we're ready to go. When watering small plants, try and use a rose on the end of your watering can, although ideally a rose that works, like this one. The tomatoes in this bed have their own irrigation system, but there isn't any feeds included. I totally recommend that you feed your tomatoes at least once a week. And if you've ever wondered why your friends' tomatoes are so much better than yours, start feeding them and I guarantee you will see the results.